Hey, you know the long-necked dinosaurs? Well, what do you think the earliest members of that group looked like? Huh? Do you have a guess in your head? An image? Okay, you ready? Well, this is Eoraptor, and I bet a lot of you were not expecting that. Because this looks a lot more like a miniature T-Rex or Allosaurus or any of the other two-legged meat-eating dinosaurs called the theropods, and a lot less like the giant long-necked dinosaurs called sauropods. Well, it turns out those are actually sister groups, which means that those two groups of dinosaurs are more closely related to each other than either one is to any other group of dinosaurs. So it makes sense that the earliest members of each of those two groups would have looked very similar to each other at the start. This does mean that it is difficult to tell them apart in their earliest stages, and while Eoraptor is generally considered to be a really early sauropodomorph, we didn't think that originally, and it seems like there might still be some lingering debate about that. Regardless of what kind of dinosaur it was absolutely one of the earliest dinosaurs that we've ever found, from about 230 million years ago in the Triassic of Argentina. It was only about 4 feet long. It's from a time when dinosaurs were just getting started. For example, in the area that Eoraptor was found, dinosaurs make up only 6% of the total tetrapod sample, so things like reptiles, mammals, amphibians. So there were still other weird groups that were dominant at the time, but because of critters like Eoraptor, it wouldn't be for long. The scientists that originally described it noted that it looks very similar to sort of what we would expect from the ancestor of all dinosaurs as a whole, but they ultimately decided it had a couple of features that specifically placed it as being an early theropod right there. But since then, a bunch of studies have decided that it was probably actually an early sauropodomorph, not a theropod. And I don't think I've ever seen that many citations on Wikipedia for any single claim. Like, even Wikipedia is like, this is excessive. But it's still probably worth mentioning that not everyone seems to agree. Like, this study from 2011, for example, decided that it was in fact a theropod. Or some people even thought that it was neither theropod nor a sauropodomorph because it was actually a more primitive member of the general group that includes those two subgroups, which is called Saurischia. Anyway, trying to classify animals living close to the divergence times for major groups is tricky, but one of the things that I think Eoraptor is a fun reminder of, especially because it was probably an early member of the group that would go on to include the giant long-necked dinosaurs, is that all dinosaurs started out as two-legged animals, bipedal little guys. Even though most dinosaurs you can think of probably are walking around on 4 legs, they're quadrupedal. So here's your fun fact of the day. Being quadrupedal evolved within dinosaurs independently at least 4 different times. For the ceratopsians, things like Triceratops, the Thyreophorans like Stegosaurus and Ankylosaurus, the Hadrosauriforms, duck-billed dinosaurs, and of course, the long-necked sauropods. Oh, and last thing, I've decided for a couple reasons not to post any more of my Dinovember videos this year on TikTok. So they are only for you guys, the people watching on either Instagram or YouTube. So thank you for following me on the places where I don't have nearly as much of a following. I hope you stick around. Would you like to see one of the cutest dinosaurs ever? We all know the big armored dinosaurs like Ankylosaurus and Stegosaurus. Well, yesterday I mentioned that they're one of the groups of dinosaurs that started off really small and bipedal, walking around on 2 legs. So would you like to see what the really early armored dinosaurs looked like? 2 super quick things as context. First, for a family tree of any group of animals, the species that are closer to the evolutionary origin of the group, so ones that are not like a bunch of branching divergences away from this point, but the ones that are more closely related to what would have been the earliest members of the group, are called more basal members as opposed to more derived members of the group. And second, the group of armored dinosaurs is called Thyreophora. So with that out of the way, the basalmost thyreophoran that we've ever found is called Scutosaurus. And I guess in fairness, I'm not actually sure if it's pronounced like that or if it's Scutosaurus, but one of those two is significantly more adorable than the other, so I choose that one. And they looked like this. Oh my god. Scutosaurus is from the early Jurassic of Arizona, was only about 4 feet long, and you're welcome for your new favorite dinosaur. However, unfortunately, it would not have probably been very nice to pet because it had hundreds of tiny little armored plates in its skin called osteoderms. Which, by the way, are bones that grew inside its skin. Crocodilians actually do the same thing. Their armor is made up of little bones that are not attached to the rest of their skeleton. They grow free-floating inside its skin, and all the armored dinosaurs were doing the same thing, just often more extravagantly, which is so sick. Scutosaurus's tail was also unusually really long, which honestly makes sense if the front half of his body was extra heavy because of all its armor. Oh, and lastly, just a PSA not to confuse that little guy with Scutosaurus, which was a chonky non-dinosaur reptile from the period right before the time of the dinosaurs called the Permian. It did also have osteoderms, but was significantly less adorable, which is the important part, if we're being honest. Dinosaurs get named after pop culture references probably a lot more often than you would think. Like this little dude, for example, which is the earliest known member of the group of horned dinosaurs, so animals like Triceratops, which are called the Ceratopsians. It was only about 4 feet long, was bipedal, and from the late Jurassic of northwestern China, and its name is Yinlong. That name comes from the Chinese words yin meaning hidden and long meaning dragon, after the movie Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which was filmed very close to the spot where the original specimen of this dinosaur was found. That specimen, by the way, is beautifully preserved. Just pause and look at that for a sec. Specifically, I think the skull is so weird. Like the triangle shape in both directions and the funny overbite. I'm not exactly sure what it is about it, but I just love it. Honestly, they remind me just a little bit of this weird group of reptiles from the Triassic called Rhynchosaurs. I think it's mostly like just the triangle head or something. Anyway, Yinlong has been important for helping scientists sort out some of the details of how different groups of dinosaurs are related to each other. The Ceratopsians have for a long time been thought to be the sister group to the Pachycephalosaurs, the two-legged, thick-skulled dudes, and Yinlong basically helped provide some even more solid reason for that idea. Because Yinlong had a number of transitional features that were somewhere in between things specific to later Ceratopsians versus other groups of dinosaurs, plus being similar in some ways to the Pachycephalosaurs, it really provided some solid evidence for placing Pachycephalosauria and Ceratopsia together in a group called Marginocephalia. And another thing, the original study describing the very first specimen of Yinlong, what's called the holotype specimen, also noticed some similarities that it had to another group of even more enigmatic dinosaurs called the Heterodontosaurids, which historically have been a little confusing. And because of Yinlong's similarities to them, the study concluded that the Heterodontosaurids should be thought of as the sister group to all of Marginocephalia and proposed putting them together in a group called Heterodontosauriforms. We get all the taxonomic jargon today. But that didn't last. A study from about 10 years later from some of the same authors did a more thorough investigation of Yinlong's non-skull anatomy, its postcranial skeleton, and based on using that in a larger analysis with a bunch of different species and a few hundred important anatomical features, they concluded that actually the Heterodontosaurids represent an early stage in the evolution of all of Ornithischia, which is the big group that includes Marginocephalians and all of the armored dinosaurs like Ankylosaurus and Stegosaurus, and all the duck-billed dinosaurs, so things like Iguanodon and Parasaurolophus. So again, like I said a video or two ago, taxonomy near the origins of any particular group is tricky. Now don't forget to leave a comment with what dinosaur you would like me to talk about next.